It's the conversation for this Thursday, the 10th of April. My name is Blaise Bryant. I am joined on the phone by Jimmy Vielkind. Jimmy is a reporter for Capital New York, and he was formerly with the Albany Times-Union. We spoke about the New York State budget, what's good, what's bad, and that sort of thing, and we have about 15 minutes to do it. I first asked him about Bill de Blasio and pre-kindergarten.
Well, so Mayor de Blasio, a Democrat who was just elected this last fall in New York City, had really wanted authority to raise taxes in the city on the wealthiest earners, and he wanted to direct that money, some $340 million of it per year, to expand pre-kindergarten programs and take another $190 million and direct it toward after-school programs. And so because of the way the state constitution and state law is set up, no locality, including New York City, has the ability to raise taxes on its own within its own borders without the approval of the state legislature. And of course, these home rule requirements go back to a very different time when the state house was trying to keep in check sort of the democratic machines in New York City. But this legacy exists. And so de Blasio very quickly ran into trouble with this idea of a tax hike in the form of Republicans in the state Senate and Andrew Cuomo, the governor, who is a fellow Democrat like de Blasio and who likes to emphasize how he has a warm personal relationship with him, though the two are quite frequently seen as political rivals. So this tax turned out to be something of a non-starter, and de Blasio pushed and he pushed and he pushed, but he was able to, in the end, to sort of settle for an increase in state spending on pre-kindergarten. That's going to be about $340 million statewide, and it's unclear exactly how that money is going to shake out because it's a reimbursement plan, which is to say that districts will have to develop plans, develop their kindergarten programs, and then ask for state money sort of on the back end. But it's thought that the bulk of that money is going to go to New York City because New York City is the one that is champing at the bit to try and set up a pre-kindergarten system. So that really was the biggest thing, and you could argue that it was a win for de Blasio in the sense that he got the money that he had originally sought. You could also argue that it was a loss. He wasn't able to raise the taxes, and you could say that Governor Cuomo, who was putting together his fourth budget of his first term in office, really kind of outfoxed him. He was able to stop that tax, which he didn't want to have happen in an election year. He wanted to have the talking point that taxes were going down, not up in the state under his watch. And he also was able to push through significant protections for charter schools, which he had sought and which were really in response to a move by de Blasio to sort of restrain the growth of charter schools within New York City.
But didn't some of those charter school pre-K programs, I know they certainly were battling about those, but I really don't see what the big deal is that Governor Cuomo made out of it in terms of having some of this pre-K stuff for charter schools grow.
Well, that wasn't it. It wasn't necessarily the pre-K programs to the charter schools, but you're correct in that was one part of the pre-K deal, that it was opened up to charter schools, whereby it was originally envisioned by de Blasio, it was not. But what happened with the charter schools was something separate. So charter schools, for listeners who might not know, are chartered by the state, but they're generally privately run. They're generally non-unionized. And they are essentially supported by public dollars, but designed to be innovative, designed to be outside of the regular existing public school framework within any community. In Albany, there are several, and in New York City, there are the most. And so the last administration in New York City, that of Michael Bloomberg, was unabashedly pro-charter. And Bloomberg, because space is so expensive and at such a premium within New York City, essentially allowed charter schools to co-locate in public school buildings. Now, de Blasio had questioned this policy, and he had questioned the wisdom of it and questioned why essentially corporations, or not legally corporations, but these private entities with lots of overhead, with lots of wealthy backers, with lots of money for lobbying, why were they getting this sweetheart deal? Why weren't they paying something to the New York City school system in exchange for the use of the facilities? So he had campaigned on a promise that he was going to start charging these charter schools rent. And when a slew of charter school location decisions came before him, he actually overturned 3 co-location decisions that had been approved at the end of the Bloomberg era. And this overturning sort of started a revolt, an uproar, or you could argue it was seized upon by the charter school advocates to say that there is a crisis and we must respond, we must do something, and we must get some protection. And leading that charge was Governor Cuomo, as well as the Republican and Democratic leaders in the New York State Senate. Independent Democratic leaders in the New York State Senate. So what they were able to do was essentially establish an affirmative right for a charter school to co-locate in a New York City public school or any public school building, provided that was part of its original space plan, as well as an increase in per-pupil funding for charter schools that would be used to offset any expenses related to creating or renting a facility.
That's really interesting, and certainly I could devote a whole half-hour show to why this works and why it doesn't, and the pros and cons and such. And certainly because this is a college radio station, it is Radio St. Rose, talk about how there were some cuts to education, higher education. However, there were some pluses in terms of TAP money that was implemented in the budget, right?
That's right. The basic award for the tuition assistance program did rise, and that was for the first time in many, many, many years. The issue regarding TAB, or the tuition assistance program, that sort of drew more political debate was whether or not it should be opened to undocumented immigrants, which is what supporters call the DREAM Act. That proposal had failed during a New York State Senate vote a few weeks before the budget. It did not pass the State Assembly, which is dominated by Democrats, but it failed in that State Senate, where the Republicans sort of lead the governing coalition. And there was talk about putting that into the budget, but it sort of fell flat.
What pushed these cuts through for TAP in terms of, were these undocumented immigrants that were they able to be covered?
No, under current law, the undocumented immigrants are not available to, the program is not available to them. And the argument by advocates is that these are often students who have lived in the United States, lived in New York for most of their adult lives. In some instances, they were brought here by parents who perhaps immigrated to the United States without documentation or outside of the law when they were very small, perhaps even infants. And as such, they are not legally U.S. citizens, though for all intents and purposes, they grew up here. They're just like any other regular American kid, like me or you. And so the idea is that if we want to foster immigrants, we want them to grow and prosper in society. We want to support higher education. But the advocates claim that this is a program that is being closed to them because of that status and because of their immigration situation unfairly, because again, they're dreaming of becoming U.S. citizens, of being productive U.S. citizens, and they in many cases are on some sort of a path to citizenship. Now, the opponents' detractors say that why should we be using taxpayer dollars here to help undocumented immigrants when Dick and Jane and Tommy and people who have been Americans for a while are not getting necessarily a tuition assistance boost. So there was an ideological rub there.
Right. And basically, what is sad about this whole thing, Jimmy, is the fact that here there are several of these kids who are suffering because of stuff they had nothing to do with in terms of their parents coming over, quote-unquote, illegally.
Yes, that people certainly make that argument.
I mean, I certainly am one to make that argument. So let's talk about how the whole taxes and such. So property taxes went down and factory taxes went up, or am I getting? I'm getting that reversed.
That's not quite accurate. There were a bunch of things that occurred on the taxation front in the budget. The one that probably listeners will most notice if they own homes is that there will be a property tax rebate check. And what that's going to mean is that this was again something that was outlined by Governor Cuomo, and it's a pretty big political win for him, as we've reported on our site, CapitolNewYork.com. But the way this is going to work is the governor wanted to provide property tax relief to homeowners around the state, particularly in suburban areas, and he wanted also to somehow hook that to spending restraint by various localities. Now, the governor has been talking about the high tax burden in New York and lamenting the fact that some of that goes and essentially stems from local government actions, be it school districts or towns or cities or villages, that they are really part of driving up this burden, and the state government has no real say over how that goes. So the governor wanted to the governor was hoping to use these rebate checks, which would go right into citizens' pockets, as an incentive to force locally elected officials to act. So under the adopted plan in this next year, residents will get a rebate if their locality abides by the state's 2% property tax cap. That is to say, if it keeps any proposed increase in property taxes to less than 2%. If it does that, homeowners will get a check. In future years, what's going to happen is a locality will have to participate in a service plan, which is going to be developed by a county, or with regard to school taxes, it's going to be developed by a BOCES, which is sort of a regional kind of school cooperative services board. And they'll have to present an efficiency plan to the state, and if the state approves the plan, then again the homeowners get the taxes. This is somewhat softer than what Cuomo proposed. He was looking to see actual spending reductions on the part of these localities. But nonetheless, the important point for any politician running for office is that these checks are going to be going out in the mail. Now, on other fronts in taxation, what we saw was the creation of a manufacturer's tax credit. It had originally been proposed just for upstate New York areas, but it was extended statewide, really at the behest of Senate Republicans, many of whom come from Long Island. And as you might know, Long Island was not included in that original definition. The state's estate tax went up, the threshold went up, and this was something that was important to small business groups and to the farm lobby, as well as to, conservatives and tax policy people. What happened here was that any estate over $1 million was subject to taxation, and the argument was, well, $1 million on the grand scheme of things isn't so much, especially if you're talking about a small business that you're trying to pass on, especially if you're talking about a family farm. So that threshold was raised to about $5 million over a couple of years, and it's going to be continued to go up. And that's a lot closer to what the federal level is on taxation. The other thing was changes to the corporate tax structure. A dedicated tax that had been in place for the state's banks was eliminated, and banks were essentially melded in with the regular corporations for taxation purposes. And the rate was lowered from 7.1% to 6.5%. That was something that progressive and labor-backed groups really fought. They said it was a giveaway to Wall Street, but at the end of the day, Governor Cuomo sort of won on that issue as well.
College students wonder about jobs, and how does this factory tax that was implemented into the budget help, or does it even help with job creation? Because people aren't going to take advantage of these house taxes or property taxes if they can't come and live here because of the factory tax.
Well, it's a little bit early to see. And this is a factory tax credit, so this was actually not a new tax on manufacturers. I just want to be clear about that.
Thank you.
And so what that means is hopefully it will give some money back to the state's manufacturers and encourage them to hire. So it remains to be seen exactly how that's going to exactly how it's going to go on, how it's going to be implemented and what the results will be. But the idea of state leaders was that to incentivize hiring.
And how do you think, very quickly, Governor Cuomo has done in terms of fulfilling some of the promises in terms of taxation and job creation that he said in his State of the State address in January?
Well, the governor has he put forward some promises. They originally came from some commissions he convened in the fall, and he delivered. Again, the property tax rebate check was certainly a big priority for him, and that's one, in an election year that's going to be tangible. Voters are going to get checks, and the governor and other elected leaders are hoping it's going to create warm feelings for them before voters go to the polling booths. He also promised, and he wanted to reduce these corporate tax rates, and while that change went through without really any modification. So I think he delivered on both of those fronts.
That's great. Jimmy Vielkind is the excellent, intrepid reporter for Capital New York, formerly of the Times-Union. Jimmy, I want to thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me on the conversation. I very much appreciate it.
My pleasure, Blaise. Take care.
So in 15 seconds, we will continue the conversation. Victoria Ortiz will tell us about a new app. Have you ever wondered what someone's reaction is after that Snapchat that you send versus seeing that message that says haha or LOL? Well, the Conversation's Victoria Ortiz speaks with an app developer. Keith Russell is a member of Dumbstruck Incorporated. They spoke recently about the app Dumbstruck.
Dumbstruck is an iPhone app where you can take a photo or a video and send it to one of your friends. And when they open the app, it records a 7-second video of their reaction, and it sends their reaction back to you. So you can get their authentic reaction versus them faking it through a LOL message or a haha or whatever else people send through these other apps.
So it's only offered through iPhone?
Currently, we're working on an Android version, which it should be out sometime in the next couple of months or so.
Why is it only offered for iPhone? Like, why?
It's the easiest market to get into and grow. It's very hard to grow as just an Android app, just because there's a lot more apps on Android because there's no approval process or anything. Mm-hmm. So anybody can get an app in the Google Play Store. Where essentially, it's essentially the same model that Instagram went through, where they were just a iPhone app, then they grew, and then they released it on Android, and then instantly their user base doubled because there was a lot of Android users waiting for it, just like how there's a lot of Android users waiting for Dumbstruck.
So how long has Dumbstruck been around?
We launched in December. We started working on it in October. So as a company, October of last year.
That's a very short amount of time.
It is a very short amount of time. Typically, these kind of things take a lot longer to build, but we have very talented developers.
So why are you guys based in Albany? Why aren't you based in other larger cities?
We're in Albany because myself and the other two co-founders are based in Albany, or we live in Albany. Our CEO and CTO were both they were both in the PhD program at UAlbany, and instructors. They taught a lot of classes in the similar space as this, and on the side they started a mobile app idea lab called Dr. Apps, where they were just gonna make whatever app they wanted to and try to turn it into a business. And they brought me on board for the app that they started working on before Dumbstruck, and then we kind of just pushed everything else away and focused on Dumbstruck once that idea came up.
Now, you said that both of your co-founders were teaching in Albany and stuff.
Yeah.
What were you doing?
I was working for a company called Who Say, which is the way they market themselves now is how's this go? It's an online celebrity magazine by the celebrities or something. I don't know. It's a social media type website that celebrities use, with a lot of editorial content based on the celebrities. While I was there, I worked on the apps and stuff that the celebrities would use to post their content out to Facebook and Twitter and all these other social sites, and Who Say, because they all have their own profiles and stuff on there. And I did that and some other things while I was there.
Did you get to meet any celebrities?
I didn't.
So now that you are in Albany, do you have a lot of competition here? Not competition so much, but is there a lot of technology app specific growing out here?
There's a lot of tech companies in Albany that I've been discovering I didn't really know existed before, but most of them are they're enterprise type type companies, where we're more of like a consumer application. So it's almost like, I'm trying to think of a good comparison because most people never heard of most enterprise apps. It's kind of like comparing like IBM to Twitter,
Oh.
or like one is like much more like corporate, and the other is kind of like probably an office that people ride skateboards in. Yeah, so that's where we're different. There's not a lot of like consumer applications in this region. Like most of those happen out in San Francisco. A lot of the enterprise apps are out here though. So those are really the only people that we're like competing with for employees. But as far as users go, we're not competing with anybody out here.
You're very young. You're 23.
I am 23.
And you're doing all sorts of different things. Do you find that there are a lot of people your age working in this company? Or
I mean, I feel like there's more and more. Our CTO, his name's Mike Tansky. He is the same age as I am, and again, he's at the same point as me. Like we're both working on Dumbstruck, but he was also a PhD student, which I never was. So I think that's happening more and more. Like we're not even the youngest people at our company. We just started working with a new guy on one of our web projects, who's I think he like just turned 22, and we have another guy who's 21. So it's a very young company. I don't think it's like typical for most of their company to be between 21 and 23, but it's just the people that we found.
now, you being young, did you get any sort of formal education?
I did not. I went to college for about a month studying business, which turns out doesn't really apply to anything that I'm doing because I didn't make it past the first few accounting classes. So, yeah, I don't have any formal education in this space.
Then how did you learn all of the skills and tools you needed?
I was self-taught. I started learning how to design when I was like 11 or 12 or something, like very young. But I was mostly just doing like just random things in Photoshop, just having fun. And then eventually one of my friends started a band, and they needed some work done for their band. So I got into that, and then I accidentally ended up doing apps, which is kind of all I do now.
Would you go back to web design work compared to app design?
Not full time. Like occasionally if a cool product comes up or something, I probably will, but I don't really see that happening too often. I'm kind of busy with the apps.
What are recent things your company has done to promote itself?
It's a good question. Up until a couple of weeks ago, we really didn't do anything. But we did go to South by Southwest, where we just that was more about just becoming known within the technology industry versus just getting a lot of users, because it turns out a lot of other tech entrepreneurs and those types of people end up out there. And we just went out there, and we just went to a lot of the events that these people are at and met a lot of good people. And that's really all we've done as far as that goes. Yeah, I mean a lot of the growth that happens with these kind of apps come from word of mouth, because like as soon as you join the app, it's a lot more fun if your friends are on the app, so you're gonna want to tell all your friends to join the app, and then it'll just branch out from there, and eventually everybody's on the app. So
yeah,
there's been minimal marketing or advertising happening.
So where did the idea come from for this app?
Our CTO, he's a big fan of using like the phone's technology for things that it's not necessarily meant for, or things that it hasn't been used for really. And he was looking at the front-facing camera, like this would be cool to capture reactions. So then he talked to our now CEO about that, and they came to me as like, hey, we want to do something with reactions and messaging or something. So I took that and I put together some design ideas, and we just kind of went from there. So it was really just about like how can we use the front-facing camera for something other than taking selfies. So, and that's what we're doing now.
So how do you keep from being compared to apps like Snapchats or other kind of apps that have that interaction?
The thing about Snapchat is they're missing that interaction that that we really focus on, and that's the reaction of the person receiving the message. Like a lot of times people will like fake it through Snapchat, so when they get a funny photo, they'll take a picture of them laughing or something and send it back. But with ours, you can actually like see them process what the message is in their head, and then you can see the actual laugh that happens with it, which it's very new. Nobody else really did that before us. There's been a couple of other apps coming out afterwards that seem to be like doing similar stuff, but in very different ways. But yeah, it just comes with the territory. When you make an app, you're gonna get compared to every other app.
So what were some of the bigger challenges you had to overcome with creating this app?
A lot of them were like technology issues. So like a big one that I can think of right now was when we introduced video messaging. Like there wasn't really a really good way to get to watch a quality video on the phone at the same time record a high quality video, which we have to do because you're watching the person's message while recording a reaction, and our developers like had to essentially go as close to the phone's hardware as you can get while building this without actually making your own phone in order to get to work. So we weren't expecting that. Like we thought that was all going to come together much easier and quicker, which is why we didn't even launch initially with video messaging, just because we had to really figure that out. And yeah, that's really it. It's mostly just been the technology side of things that's been difficult.
Yeah. So what is it specifically that you do? Like you do design.
I spend most of my time skateboarding around the office. And no. I mean I came up with all the visuals for the app. So I picked Outer Purple. I was responsible for like coming up with the with some help from other people. Obviously, like everybody had their input on everything. Coming up with the actual process of like the process that user goes through to acquire friends on the app, to send messages, to react to those messages, and I'm also responsible for just like overall like product management, just to make sure everything's on schedule and everything's running smoothly and those kind of things.
That was Victoria Ortiz speaking with app developer Keith Russell. To find out more information about Dumbstruck, you may go to www.keithwrussell.com. And I want to thank you for listening to the conversation on Radio St. Rose. To listen to this as well as past shows, please go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/Radio St. Rose Conversation. Isaiah Agoho produces our program. Be sure to listen next week. For the conversation, I'm Blaise Bryant.